I'm going to show you how to make biltong today. I'm Jason Horsler, poet, drummer, and somebody who loves delicious dried, air-dried meat. And we are in my garden in England, and I'm going to show you how I make biltong, because in England it's really hard to get nice tasting biltong at a reasonable price. So first thing is to try and source your meat, and it's actually quite hard to find the exact right meat. We got these two pieces from Costco yesterday, and these are silver side joints, and all of this meat altogether is about £60, which sounds expensive, but if you consider that after curing this and turning this into biltong, it will triple in its value, easily triple. The other thing you'll notice as I unwrap this is this meat has got a huge fat cap on it. That's quite hard to find in England because butchers tend to remove a lot of the fat. But we actually want a lot of fat on our biltong. Some people don't want fat on their biltong, but they're vegetarians. We want fat on our biltong. And to be honest, if you are eating biltong with fat on it and you don't like it, just rip the little piece of fat off the end and put it back in the bag, and I will hunt it down and eat it. So what we're going to do, sometimes these things come as roast joints that have already been prepared. This one has these little elastics. I'm going to get rid of those, and I'm not going to show you me cutting up all of this meat in this first part of the video. I'm going to save you some time, but I'm going to do it in all sorts of stages and take you right to the end of the process. Now, what's really important is we want to find the grain of the meat, because when we air dry biltong, we want to have it sliced so that the grain is facing down, and then when we slice it into edible pieces, we cut against the grain. So if I show you on this piece of meat, you can see that the grain is doing that, especially over there. You can see the lines of muscle are moving like that. So I definitely don't want to be slicing it this way, even though the fat and the side over here looks like that's the way to cut. That would be a mistake. What I want to do is cut along the grain. I also want to pay attention to the shape of the meat. This meat is a sort of wedge shape. It's going to make life a little bit more difficult, but we will see how we can slice it into portions. If I just slice that end off, I'm just going to end up with a big piece of fat. So I'm going to cheat slightly and slice inwards and rather make it sort of wedge shaped. That's just my choice as I go. This piece over here, which I'll do later on, is a bit more square, and that might be easier to work with. Now, when you're slicing biltong, you want to make sure that you slice them into quite big slabs. The temptation is to slice them into slabs that big, which is kind of what you buy at the shop. But remember, the meat will shrink as it dries. So my rule of thumb is 2 finger spaces is about as wide as I want to go. And I'm gonna estimate a little bit. So what I like to do is cut a little bit of the fat just to give me some starting lines and see if it fits. And that fits quite nice. Out of this piece, I'm going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slices. You want a really sharp knife, and you want a long knife, so you can try and do as little sawing as possible. With silver side, you might have to do some sawing because it does have some tendons. Right, well, here we go. I'm cutting in and at a slight angle to make a wedge. I've got through the fat. There's a lot of fat there. That's going to be a really fatty piece of biltong, but for me, that's okay. Look at that, that's way too much fat. But after the curing, I can still trim it down if I like. There's one. This is a lovely sharp knife, and it's the perfect knife. It's thin, the blade is thin and long. There's 2. There's 3. And this last slice will be a bit leaner, so maybe some of the people eating my biltong who don't want to eat that much fat will prefer this when it comes to serving it. And there's 4 really good slices. So now I've sliced up the meat into these nice slabs, as we would say in South Africa, duck slabs. And I'm now going to salt it. I'm going to use coarse rock salt, and it must be non-iodized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit at the bottom of the tray, and I'm going to just lay my meat down in the tray, almost like that game we used to play when I was a kid called Tetris. And some of you will know what Tetris is. And what I'm trying to do here is get the meat to fit nicely in there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then on top of these slices, we generously pour some salt. And then lay the next layer. And the main thing here is to get every part of the meat touching salt, every single part. And you can be very generous with the salt at this stage. And if you have a cardiologist and they know that you're doing this, they will have their own heart attack in your place. But what you want to do with the salt is leave it on there now for about 3 hours. I like to massage it in a bit, really push the meat down, get those grains to go into the meat a little bit. Now we're going to leave this for 3 hours, but we're going to set the alarm on the stove for 1.5 hours, and then what we'll do is we'll take the meat out and just turn it. And when we're doing that, we'll just observe if there's any parts of the meat that still haven't been touched by salt crystals. Expect quite a bit of juice to come out of the meat because the salt will pull some of the water out. And that's this stage. And what I will show you next is how to prepare the next 2 parts of the biltong. So while this is curing with the salt, we're going to make a dry mix and we're going to make a brine. Let's go and do that now. While the meat is being salted over here, I'm going to show you how to make the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients, like I said a minute ago. So what we're going to be using is, as our most important ingredient of all, dried coriander seeds. And I get these from Indian spice shops, and it's quite cheap and they're wonderful things. I hate fresh coriander, but coriander seeds is one of my favorite flavors. Now, if you look up recipes for biltong on the internet, you're going to get all sorts of measurements, but it's almost always the same ingredients. You're going to have salt, you're going to have vinegar, you're going to have coriander, you're going to have pepper. Just the ratios seem to change slightly. And I've made quite a few batches of biltong. They're all delicious, but as I'm going, I'm learning more and more about what I like to taste. So I'm just going to give you my sort of mixture. I make notes of what I do each time, and I usually do it per kilogram of meat. So we've got 5 kilograms of meat, and then I just multiply all my ingredients by 5. But I tend to find that it's better to go slightly more than that so that you have leftovers, because, for example, the dry mix has to cover the outside of all the slabs of meat, and I've often found that I've made too little dry mix when I get to that stage in the process. So I'm going to make more than I need. Now, you can use coriander seeds just as is, but if you really want to get the flavor out, what you want to do is give them a little bit of a toasting. Now, that's a lot of coriander seeds. For my 5 kilograms, I'm putting about 800 mils of coriander seeds. I'm not going to do them all in one batch. I'm actually just going to put enough coriander seeds to line the bottom of the pan. And what's really important is I don't want to burn them either. I want to start smelling them. What I look for is a little bit of smoke as well. And once the pan's hot, the process goes past quite fast. So while that's heating up, I'll quickly tell you what else I'm going to put in the mix. I've got about 3 teaspoons of ground black pepper. I might put some more. I've got 4 teaspoons of white pepper I'm going to put into the mix. I've got some paprika. I'll usually put about 2.5 teaspoons of paprika. That's just I like doing that. I'll put a little bit more salt. This will be that low sodium salt, which is quite nice. I will put a few teaspoons of barbecue spice because I want this to be barbecue flavored biltong. And I will put some sugar. In fact, I'm going to put 8 teaspoons, maybe even 10 teaspoons of sugar. Remember, the dry ingredients will usually peel off and fall off, a lot of them. So you want to put enough on that you'll get some of the flavoring stuck on the biltong even when you eat it. I'm also going to make a brine, and the brine will be made out of vinegar, Leon Perrins, Worcester sauce. You can use any Worcester sauce you like, and I've got a few sort of nearly half finished bottles of soy sauce. I'll chuck those in there. I've always liked the taste of Maggi, what would you call this, liquid seasoning, and so I'll put a few splashes of that as well. Let's see how this is doing. Can you see the smoke? It also has a little bit of a popcorn kind of flavor when it starts smoking like this. And it's very important to dump it out to stop the cooking because you don't want it to get blackened or burnt. I'm going to do it in little batches like this, and now that the pan is hot, it will go quite fast. When all of this has been toasted, I'm going to take my little food blender and the little attachment that goes with it, and I'm going to grind everything together, but I'm not going to grind too fine because I do want some whole kernels of coriander as well because it looks nice on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there for a sec, and then once I've got all the dry ingredients ready to go, I'll show you that next step. So I have now ground the coriander down. You can see I've left quite a lot of the husks. I wish you were in here with me and you could smell what this smells like. The hot plate releases the coriander oil, and the toastiness makes it have a slightly sort of smoky flavor. It's just heavenly. I've still got a bit left in the bowl because in the last batch that I put into the grinder, which is a bit noisy, and that's why I didn't want to put you through having to watch me do all of that. Into this last batch, I'm going to put all the other dry ingredients. So I've got my black pepper, and I've got white pepper. You can use official teaspoon things like this. So white pepper, I don't remember these things off by heart, is going to be 4 teaspoons. But really, because most of this is going to dust off, be generous. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoopsie. Okay. I actually like biltong that's got a bit of bite back, so that's fine. The paprika, that's going to be 2.5, so I'm just going to dump 3 generous teaspoons of paprika. This is genuine Hungarian paprika. I'm very, very lucky. I married the person holding the camera, and she's Hungarian. Hi, Aggie.
Hi.
I'm going to put a barbecue spice, whatever you got in your supermarket. We found this stuff. It's a really smoky one, so it's quite nice. And again, be generous. Don't worry about it. Get some flavor in there. Biltong is best when it has a bit of bite. Low salt, because I'm already using real salt in the curing of the meat. Most of that will be rubbed off, but the salt will have gone into the meat a bit as well. So I find just adding a bit more salt, maybe 1 or 2 teaspoons, but this low sodium salt, because I'm 50, and so I've got to sort of watch out. That's about enough of that. And sugar. I didn't put sugar in for a long time, and then I started trying out sugar in my mixture, and I found it made the biltong taste brilliant. So again, estimate over here for this much, 8 teaspoons. You know what, I'm going to use the tablespoon measurement, and it may feel like a lot, but remember that is a lot of meat, And also remember, a lot of this is going to come out. It's going to dust off, it's going to fall off in the dryer. So it's not bad to have it in there. And then put that all together. Watch out for the sound. Now I've got the glass bowl. I'm just going to reaccumulate all my ingredients, just mix them together a bit. Have a look at that. Give you a bit more light. The paprika does give it a nice bit of a red colour, and because the meat will be wet, that will activate a little bit more, so you'll get a nice reddish coating on your meat. So at this stage, I like to grab a little teaspoon. I know it's very dry, but I think every chef should taste and just see if it needs anything more. That's going to be alright. Maybe a tad more salt, maybe a tad more sugar. I'll decide a little bit later on. Mix that in. Now we're going to have a look at the brine. Now the brine, we're going to use red wine vinegar. You can use other vinegars. I've tried cider vinegar. The problem with cider vinegar is you actually can taste it, cider vinegar, when you're finished. But of all the vinegars I've used, just normal red wine vinegar is the best. For 5 kilograms of meat, we're going to need 1,100 millimeters of vinegar. The reason why we have to use so much is because we're going to put the meat in a bath of vinegar, and it must cover every single part of the meat right up to the top. So there is 1,000 milliliters of vinegar, give or take. That's going to be our meat bath right there. And I'm going to pop in just the rest of that. Then we're going to put, I've just got some leftover soy sauce, why waste? I'll pop that in there. You barely will make any difference to the taste, but you know, nobody's going to use these half bottles. So typical in a family, there'll be 3 bottles of tomato sauce open in the fridge, all of them nearly finished. Same thing with the soy sauce. We've got to sort of cut it down to just 1 open bottle. Alright, we've got the Liam Perrins. Product placement, but it doesn't have to be Liam Perrins. And this is going to take a while to come out because we're going to need quite a lot of this. So for this one, we need 375 mils. So it's at 100 now. So I'm going to put it all the way up to 475. Now, I'm not going to bore you by asking you to watch me while I'm doing that. But what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of that Maggi seasoning in as well. And then just look at it and decide whether that's going to cover the meat. If I don't have enough liquid, I'll put a splash more vinegar, splash more Liam Perrins. The idea is that once the meat is in here and I've pushed the meat down, the liquid must cover the top. And I'll show you a little trick I do with that one as well. So we'll see you in a second. Now while the meat is curing, I'm just going to show you my biltong box that I made. It's just made out of plywood. It's approximately 20, maybe 30 inches tall, and then it's square on the top. I'd say about 16 by 16, and it's just made out of plywood. I've given it a good old varnishing, and let's have a look inside. I've got a window that I actually made out of a piece of glass from a picture frame. Everything was just completely constructed from bits of wood I had around, and I've got a little vent at the top. It's got a fly screen, don't know if you can see that, and I've got a vent in the bottom corner that's also got a fly screen just to prevent any unwanted guests coming inside. It's got little magnetic holders like that, but I found that during the process I wanted a complete seal, so I also put these luggage strap things on, catches bottom and top, and they push the door against this draft seal that I've got over here. Inside, I've covered the entire interior with tinfoil. That's for two reasons. It's more hygienic, it's easier to clean and see where there's mess, and also the light bounces around. So what we have, whoopsie, are two lava lamps, and they will help keep the air inside quite dry and at the exact right temperature. And then over here, I've got a little box that I put together, also out of wood, covered in tinfoil. And the electronics, I've got a switch there to turn the lights on and off. And I've got a little dial over here, which is connected to this rather powerful computer fan. And there's an intake over here as well. And then the exterior intake is over there. So there's an intake here and there's an intake over there. And what happens is when I turn the fan on, air starts blowing right over the bulbs. So it keeps them relatively cool, picks up any convection heat from them, and then they also make their radiation heat. And that air swirls around the inside in a curve. That's why I've got this half Pringles or quarter Pringles tube here, just to aid the first swirl. That air swirls around inside the box. Some of it returns into this intake, where it keeps it, getting more and more hot, and some of it comes from outside the box, from that intake, and then all of it eventually comes from this vent, and I can control how much air is coming out. And this vent has turned out to be the main control system. So if I have it really almost completely shut, then most of the air is going to be the internal air circulating, because it's coming in to that vent. If this one is fully open, then a lot of air will be coming in from the outside vent, and the air inside the box will be cooler but have less moisture content. And what I've found with a bit of experimentation is that having this vent sort of half shut and that vent almost completely shut but still some leakage, you get the best results. And I can dry out my biltong to quite a good degree within 2 days. So that will be where I'm going to be hanging the biltong. Nice little South African flag just set into the wood. I like making things that look kind of cool, and the idea is that you can build something like this yourself. I've seen all sorts of designs on the internet, but basically all you need is some sort of naked bulb that's not an LED. Lava lamp bulbs are ideal because they're designed to get hot. Maybe a fan. Some people don't even use a fan. I like the idea of the fan, and some sort of venting, and a big enough box so that the meat doesn't touch the sides. What you do with it is up to your creative spirit, but I kind of like what I made right here in the corner. So we've now had the meat in the salt mixture for 3 hours, and I turned it 1.5 hours in, just turned all the pieces over, and you can see a lot of juice comes out and there's a lot of salt on the bottom. I've already scraped these ones. So what you want to do is I just use a butter knife and I just scrape off. That's why we like the large grain salt. If you used fine salt, you would end up with extremely salty biltong, because you would not really be able to scrape the excess salt. But just by running the knife over the meat like this, you can actually hear the salt flicking off. If a few grains stay on, it's not a bad thing, but we want to get rid of as much as possible. I'm all around, and I can hear nothing else is coming off there much anymore. So that is 5 kilograms of meat. Now I've got all the salt and the blood that's come out. I just put that into the sink, give it a quick rinse, and get all the salt crystals out of that, because I had forgotten that the best way to brine the biltong is not in this pink bowl. It's back in the same tray as I used before, because I know that meat fits in there. Another thing I forgot to tell you is when I'm making the brine, I usually take 1 whole spoon of the dry ingredients and put it into the brine so that while this is curing, it sits in the brine, double infusing its flavor. So the brine has got some of the dry ingredients in it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to brine the meat. It's really easy to do this, but what I do is I usually pour about half the brine into the tray already. And then again, just like the old-fashioned game of Tetris, we're lying the meat in and trying to maximize on the space. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what we want to do is make sure that every single part of every single slab of meat is touching the brine. And use your fingers to drive down deep inside. This is an absolutely lovely batch of meat we've got here. It really is going to be a wonderful, wonderful batch of biltong. I can tell that already. Now this is the part your wife probably doesn't want to see you doing, but she's operating the camera, she's going to see this anyway. I'm going to pour the brine on top, but you can already tell what's going to happen. It's going to overflow a little bit when I do the press down, but that's what a kitchen cloth is made for. Try and get it right in the middle of this. And hey, oh look, it looks like we made the exact right amount of brine. That's incredible. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wooden board that I was using to keep the flies off and to press the meat down into the salt. I'm now going to press the meat down into the brine. And nothing overflowed, so my wife is probably smiling behind the camera. Yes, she is. So that's going to sit there now for 2 hours. And about halfway, so I'm going to set the timer on the oven for 1 hour from now, I'm going to turn all of that. It's a bit of a sloppy, dirty operation, but I'll turn it all, and that's just to absolutely ensure that the brine goes everywhere. And then I'll leave it for another hour, and then I will see you for the next stage. So the meat has been in the brine for 2 hours now, and I turned it at the halfway point. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put some bicarbonate of soda onto the meat. Now bicarb reacts with vinegar, so you have a nice little bubbly effect. And what I'm going to do to try and get the bicarb all the way down is I'm going to massage it into the meat. I'll wash my hands for the second time, and I'm going to put 2 generous teaspoons, and this will prevent the growth of mold when it's drying. And that's 1, 2. Now that's only gone on the surface, so what we're going to do now is just turn the meat around a bit, get it all mixed up. This is a little bit of a messy part, but I'm promising my wife, who's holding the camera, that I will definitely be responsible and clean up the mess I made. But I'm just randomly pulling up the slabs of meat, turning them around. The bicarb is so reactive that it is going to go everywhere. But you can see we've got some really beautiful meat, and the vinegar in the brine, see, has started cooking the meat chemically. So essentially biltong isn't actually raw. It has been, to a certain extent, been chemically cooked by the vinegar and the brine, and of course the salt preserves it. Now it needs to stay in there for half an hour, but to make sure that the brine goes everywhere, we're going to turn it in 15 minutes. I won't show you that in the video, but I'll pretty much be doing the exact same thing I've just done. And then it'll be time for the last major intervention. I'll join you then. Alright, so the bicarbonate solution has had its chance to, we can take the wooden board off. And what we're first going to do, got a clean bowl here, and all I'm going to do is get all of these out of the brine solution. Just doesn't matter if they're still wet, because we are going to use some of the wetness to stick the dry ingredients onto the meat. So I'm just getting off as much of the brine as I care to get off, really. It is a bit wasteful, this part of the process, but this brine has obviously had raw meat in it, so I'm just going to tip it down the drain. Give the pan a little bit of a rinse. And now we're ready to begin adding the dry ingredients. And the aim here is to coat the entire outside of each one of these pieces of meat. Then I'm going to hook them. Because they're quite short, I'll hook them in chains. If you get long pieces of meat, you only put one hook, but I've learned how to fit lots of short ones into my dryer that I showed you earlier. So to do the dry ingredients, I'm going to start by just putting a bit on the bottom of the pan, and I'm going to put some of the meat onto that, and I'm going to spread that with dry ingredients. This layer over here will be thicker than the bottom layer because it's going to have meat on top of it. That. And then we put a nice generous amount. This is why I say it's better to make more dry rub than you think you're going to need, because you really have to be quite aggressive with what you put on at this stage. And one last piece on the top. Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to really begin to massage this in, examine each individual one, look where there might be some pieces of meat that don't have any of the dry ingredients yet. Just basically toss them and turn them around and push them on. Interestingly enough, the coriander is not only for flavoring, and it is a really nice flavor, it is itself a meat preservative. It's got some sort of chemical in it that actively preserves the meat. So it's actually quite a clever thing. It's not at all like, what do the Americans have, babe? Not pemmican, it's jerky. Beef jerky. It really isn't like beef jerky. It's an utterly unique thing we South Africans do. I think it's one of the best high protein, delicious snacks. Do you agree?
I do.
Yes, Hungarians are great at their smoked meats. You can smoke biltong. I did do that, and that was rather nice. But traditionally, biltong is really just preserved by salt, vinegar, coriander, and air drying. In South Africa, we'll just put the biltong on the veranda with a fly net, hopefully, and a couple of oscillating fans, But in England, we have to give the meat a little bit of a help because the air can be quite damp over here. And as you can see, I'm just playing around with the meat, looking where the gaps are. It's quite an untidy process, but the results more than make up for all the cleaning that becomes necessary. Right, I'm quite happy. Okay, now this is quite important, but I'm not going to tidy up my hands because I'm going to be touching the meat the whole time. I have pre-prepared these little wire hooks, and I've cleaned them and then burnt them as well, so there's no chance of infection. And you can see I've got a little letter on there, so this is hook G. And so what I'll do is I'll choose the top corner of the meat, put it really deep in like that. Then I'm going to get a slightly different hook. This one just looks like a C shape, and I put that in the meat somewhere. And then I'll get another piece. Let's go for something slightly smaller if we can. There. And I'll hook that one in. There we go. So this is now G. And then what I want to do is I want to use my kitchen scale. Make sure it's at 0. And I want to I want to weigh G with the weight, with the hooks on and everything. So that's 842 grams. I will write 842 here. And the reason why I do this is that the best way to decide how long you need to have your biltong in the dryer is not a matter of time, but a matter of weight. So I always forget this. We want to lose 40% of the weight. So if 10% of 842 is 84, 4 8 are 32, we want to lose about 350 grams of water from that. So I'll do the maths, and if that's the one I happen to pull out from the drying rack and weigh in 3 days time, and it's lost about 300 grams or 350 grams, I know that this is now proper air-dried biltong. So I'm going to do all the hooking outside of the camera view, and then I'll show you what it looks like inside the box. And there we go. I've hung them up on the wooden dowels up above. They were all dangling free, not touching each other on the sides. And now I just close the box and I put the locks on nice and tight. And that will run safely for about 3 days, but every day I'll just check on it and the meat will very quickly go black. Lots of the dusting will fall off onto the little tissues I've got at the bottom. The house will smell like biltong in a nice way, and we'll check in on it tomorrow. 3 days later, and here's the end result. It's not 100% dry yet. It's where I want it to be. That's the end cap. That's a really nice color. A few slices in and you can see very juicy, absolutely lovely. The light shines through it. You can see the extent that the black dryness goes into it. So that's too wet normally for most people. But what I want to do now is turn the drying box off and let it slowly now dry over the next couple of days. And I'll keep an eye on it. And the best thing of all is try it out every time I feel like it's almost ready. I prefer biltong quite wet. So, straight away, really nice balance of salt. even the very dry end cap, where it was exposed at the bottom, still really juicy. And then a nice little piece of fat just there. And actually some marbling on the inside as well. So that's really nice biltong. Probably another 2 or 3 days and it will be perfect. But I usually turn the box on and off for a couple of hours here and there. But there is a danger of over drying it as well. But in its current state now, it will last for months. So that's how I make my biltong in my biltong maker. Look at all that lovely stuff. Thanks for watching.